But first, we're going to welcome an Atlanta legend to the stage. Yes, young Atlanta legend, but still I think we can get away with calling him a legend. Now, the Gathering Spot. Anybody here familiar with the Gathering Spot? Yes, there we go. The Gathering Spot was founded and born in Washington, D.C. Not founded, but born in Washington, D.C., where my friend Ryan Wilson attended Georgetown Law School along with his co-founder, T.K. Peterson, while they worked as a portfolio manager at Fannie Mae. Since the beginning, it has always been their mission to bring people together. Now, the Gathering Spot is a diverse community of thinkers, creatives, and connectors driven to leave their mark on the world. And each gathering is curated to create conversation, provoke thought, and disrupt the status quo. Designed to foster collaboration, TGS, the Gathering Spot's initialism, as we talked about yesterday, is a mashup of culture, innovation, and purpose. An assembly of influence harnessing the spirit of the salon. And in the meantime, Bounce TV founder Ryan Glover and tech entrepreneur investor Paul Judge, rapper and activist Michael Killer Mike Render, civil rights icon Ambassador Andrew Young, and his son, successful businessman Andrew Bo Young III, formed a powerful alliance to launch Greenwood, a digital banking platform for Black and Latinx people and business owners. In December 2022, Greenwood announced a $45 million VC funding round, and the company would later acquire digital banking platform Kinley, another one of the largest Black-owned fintechs, to expand its product offering and grow its customer base. Also early in 2022, something really interesting happened. Greenwood announced that it would also be acquiring The Gathering Spot, citing that the two organizations share the same mission of supporting financial freedom for minorities through community building, entrepreneurship, group economics, and wealth building. Together, Greenwood and The Gathering Spot would deliver community building, personal finance content, and banking services. Now, the partnership recently included what became a dispute earlier this year about leadership and the future of The Gathering Spot as part of Greenwood. Both sides have now worked to reconcile, and as they look forward to the next chapter of their shared journey and how community plays a role in serving banking customers and helping them build financial security and wealth, we're going to find out what's next for Greenwood and The Gathering Spot. So we'll ask Ryan Wilson. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage, co-founder, CEO, and Chief Community Officer at Greenwood again, Ryan Wilson. I'm going to join him over this way. Take whichever seat you want, bro.
Which one is yours? I don't want to take
whichever one you don't take. Notice the sneakers, as we talked about earlier. There's a very important sneaker culture in Atlanta, but how are you doing today, my man?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, first, for folks who, and you do this all the time, you are amazing at a presence and just explaining, what you do and what you stand for. But for the folks who may not be familiar with Ryan Wilson of today, the 2023 Ryan Wilson today, how do you describe yourself?
I'm a community builder. First, it's good to be here. I remember when this conference was started, and it's good to be back. But I'm a community builder. My work is always centered around trying to figure out how to create context between folks that ordinarily wouldn't have known one another. It's funny where life takes you. You mentioned I wanted to be an attorney at one point in my life. Got all the way to law school and figured out while I was there that I didn't want to practice law. But I sent an email to my college roommate about an idea of building a physical place where we could have a conversation. At that time, it was centered around social justice, but I thought that we could use the space to talk about whatever we wanted to. That developed into The Gathering Spot, and now 7.5, almost 8 years later, TGS has been right up the street between North Side, North Ave.
And when you think about that, I mean, it sort of reminds me of, you know, back in the day, you know, our parents, when you say you wanted to be a community builder and everything, and again, you were at Georgetown, and you did go ahead and get the degree, right?
I did. I had to finish. My parents, that was part of the deal.
I'm sure, right. So again, when you tell your parents, and it's like, you know, hey, I'm at Georgetown, you know, I'm going to get this degree, but I'm really into community building. And they're like, you know, does that mean, you know, architecture? Does that mean, you know, construction business? You know, so think about, you know, the fact that a term like community building can become a thing, but I would agree that's exactly what you've become. So describe what that means. Like, you know, again, community building. You said that's what you do, but what does that mean? Especially when we're in a room like this where financial technology startup entrepreneurs are thinking about they want to build community. They want to have, you know, customers that they're probably are seen as more than just a collective of people who support their business. But what does it mean to build community?
I mean, networks matter, right? But active networks, having the ability to be able to call upon relationships and things actually occur when you make those phone calls. We got into a space, y'all, there's a lot of research about this where this is the loneliest time in human existence. Despite all of the ways for us to connect with one another, folks actually report that they are disproportionately more lonely right now than at any other point. What that means to me is that even when we come in settings like this, a lot of times we think we're networking or building a relationship when we do the quick, hi, hey, hi, how are you? Really though, the work is about trying to build relationships over time, knowing that a lot of times business is increasingly social, and we've got to play the long game with folks, right? So I love conferences like this because that person that you met yesterday, it may not pay dividends for you tomorrow or next week, right? But you'll be able to say, look, we met at Fintech South 10 years ago, and now this is an opportunity for us to go off and do whatever's happening at that moment. That, to me, is what community building is about, is creating that initial connection, but then also making sure that we figure out ways to foster and develop relationships over time.
Right, so when you think about this, I mean, the word when you think about community, it doesn't always involve, you know, commerce. You know, some people just see community as, you know, I live in a neighborhood, I can walk next door, I'll borrow some eggs and milk from someone, you know what I mean? If it's hard times, you know, we can rely on each other. So there's ways that where economics do involve community. But when you mix community and business, things can sometimes, you know, get a little bit blurred, and I don't know if it's expectations necessarily, but I've always wondered with the gathering spot, you know, there's an aspirational idea of what it means to be a member. You know, even when you walk into the gathering spot, I don't know how many of you have been inside the building here in Atlanta, the mothership, the first location, but you have member right up there, and if I believe it's backwards, right?
Backwards,
so
yeah.
it's spelled backwards, so when you see it, you see yourself there. But being a member, I always wonder is like, you know, like, what do you think that the expectations are of those new members who come into the gathering spot and they say, this is where I want to be, this is where I want to become a member? What do you think that means to them, community?
I mean, I think it's folks that are looking to be connectors, right? They're looking to give whatever it is that they know to the community, but then also receive. We use this word mentorship a lot these days, right? But we a lot of times talk about it as a one-way street. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to facilitate at TGS is that we're going to learn from one another. So to do that, though, you've got to step back and really start to explore new ways of building connections. I like to say that, like, if you come to the restaurant at TGS, you will see T-shirts and jeans sitting right next to suits and ties, right? Because what that facilitates is this idea that, like, these are two people ordinarily that shouldn't know one another. What happens when they do, right? So I'm looking for people that understand that there's power in that. That yes, although I'm 25 and at the start of my career, that person that's sitting next to me that's 65 and at the tail end of their career, there's a relationship that can be formed there, and I should be a part of this community, contributing, again, what I have, but also learning from who's around me.
And, you know, when you mentioned that, by the way, the other thing that you'll find if you go to the gathering spot, the restaurant inside, some incredibly good chicken wings. You know, so seriously, if there's any fans of wings, and if you're not a fan of wings, and if you're not a vegetarian or vegan, I don't know what you're doing in Atlanta, but we can talk about that when I'm off stage later on. But, you know, again, great food. It's a great old-fashioned at the gathering spot. But again, there is a community and a scene of people who have aspirations for entrepreneurship and business goals and actually work together. And I wonder sometimes if people understand the nuance of having a place where culture is involved and a welcoming environment for culture, but understanding that the intention here is not just a place to hang and not just a place to have community in the sense of just, networking and whatever else, but with the goals in mind of, again, how are you as a member moving yourself forward in terms of your aspirations and goals? So,
If you think about what happens in high school and college, right? Something very interesting happens in those settings that we give up on basically the day after you graduate, right? If you go back to high school, you're in an environment where people are interested in different things. You're a lot of times you have thought leaders coming to you and talking about new ideas, right? You have the ability to have space and access to explore whatever it is that you want to. I found myself immediately after graduation only around folks that were in my industry. So time and place for everything, right? But to me, good cities, good communities, good people with strong networks should have access to a variety of people that are around them doing different things. Not a complex thought, right? But a lot of times when folks look at the way that they arrange their lives post this high school and college era, there isn't a tremendous amount of diversity there.
right.
I think we've got to work harder to change that, right? Because if we do, I can talk about this most easily from the perspective of being an entrepreneur. What is it like to be in an environment where I can meet my first investor, meet potentially people that can work on my team, meet people that could support whatever it is that we're building, and do it without ever really leaving the seat that I'm in? We've got to be in networks that have that sort of access. And again, the world isn't set up in a way where that happens organically anymore. We've got to be intentional about trying to go build it.
So that's a great point, because another thing that is, when you go to the gathering spot, you notice that, again, clearly it is a place where young people of African descent, so whether we call them Black Americans, African Americans, whatever we're calling ourselves, BIPOC. Nowadays, I always say like BIPOC. I'm like, I know Tupac, but I didn't know BIPOC. BIPOC was a new one for me, but anyway. When I think about, when you go inside the space and you see so many Black faces, I also think about that word that you just mentioned, diversity. And so sometimes I know that we like to gather in places where there's somewhat of a sense of safety, of cultural, understanding of each other. But think about where we are right now, Fintech South. And Fintech is one of those areas of industry where I can certainly see a need for increased diversity. I can also see the, progress of diversity. This year looks different than some years in the past, and that's a beautiful thing. But how do you work on sort of bringing in some of those various forms of diversity that are outside of just the Black community? And is that something that you all are working on? Because clearly there's some of those connections that have to get made that naturally, maybe organically, folks may look at the gathering spot and say, well, maybe that is or maybe is not for me.
The diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation is interesting to me, right? I think a lot of times, unlike many other challenges, we approach it with this idea that we never really will be successful in accomplishing creating a diverse and equitable or inclusive, depending on what we're talking about, world or just even company. I don't accept that. Right, if you look at one of the essential premises of a conference like this and the companies that are pitching on this stage and are part of the conference, they're solving really, really, really big problems. Problems that probably 10, 15 years ago, some people would say couldn't be solved. We approach it, though, with a boldness that we can figure out a solution to whatever that challenge is. I have that same energy when we're talking about DEI work. Diversity is about being intentional. It's about assessing where you are and then figuring out where you want to get to and measuring every step along the way. So at TGS, we've looked at the way that the club has been made up in a lot of, we've looked at every way that you can look it up. I'll give you an easy one. When we started, the idea of having a city club or a country club, right, a lot of times those networks were understood to be very male-dominated. Mm-hmm. So we put a line in the stand and we said, well, we want this experience to be different. What is it like to have women really lead this experience? Well, I'm proud to say 60+% of the membership throughout our history have been women. It was about us being intentional about trying to curate an environment, right? So I try not to overly complicate conversations around diversity, because if we can solve the challenges that we're seeing in many of our organizations that are very, very difficult, I believe that we can get, if we're serious about it, we can see the same sort of solutions in the diversity, equity, and inclusion bubble.
So when you think about, there's someone at this conference right now who perhaps they're opening up to this idea. And because of the way startups usually happen, it's sort of like the gathering spot. It's two people, already have a relationship, already have a mutual respect for each other and seeing a possibility. And so again, there's sort of an incubating thing that may not automatically be diverse at its core and at its origins, and then it can grow outward. So there's probably someone here who's thinking like, well, that sounds good. And as I always like to say, aside from the altruistic reasons, the best case for diversity is American economics. Again, you're not reaching everybody unless you have a diversified strategy in mind of how you bring more people in. But for those people, it's like, how should people be thinking about diversity? Because on the way here yesterday, I was telling someone backstage, I was listening to a conversation on NPR, I believe it was 1A, the program that was there. But they were talking about the decline of the DEI officer in corporate America. And this is something that I think I've seen coming over time. You've seen the last couple of years, it's sort of like, I don't know if fatigue's the right word, but there's sort of like this shift in whether or not that's something that is necessary in corporate environments or whatnot. Anyone who is thinking that way and listening to you talk, what kind of things do you want them to think about as they approach diversity? And not just how it works for you, but how it could work for Fintech.
There's a business imperative, right? We're ultimately building companies that are trying to solve real problems for real people, right? And so if you're going to try to find the largest addressable market, you've got to make sure that there's representation at whatever table that it is that you've built to try to reach those consumers. We could sit here all day and talk about the moral imperative that I think exists, but there is legitimately a business imperative at this point. And so the same way that you need an engineer to work in the business, you also need to make sure that the company has the right perspectives at the table in order to really solve the problem that you're trying to work out each day. I don't look at it as being much more complicated than that. We accept generally that there are certain functions, I'll pick on the engineers for a second, that have to be a part of our companies if we're going to build them to scale. I would suggest that having a diverse company is another business imperative that should be accomplished, because to the extent that we continue to have DEI conversations that bump up against the philanthropic areas of how we think about the business should operate, we really are missing the business opportunity that's on the table. And given the stats, right, this is quantitative at this point, your company is unlikely to reach its highest heights if it doesn't have a really good way of thinking about new avenues, new consumers that traditionally, a lot of times, have not been spoken to.
Since the acquisition, Greenwood, the gathering spot, clearly you were someone who, came in, knows how to run a business, knows how to scale that business. You've gone from Atlanta, you and TK have gone from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. was next, and then Los Angeles. So L.A. was the most recent one. You have, connected cities is what it's called, right? So places where there's not a physical location, but a virtual and there's an event thing that people can still feel connected to the broader community of the gathering spot. But being now that you are part of a bigger company, Greenwood, tell me just a little bit about, we were talking on the way here, it's like, that's not been your role, is to be a Fintech executive, but now you're part of this company. So what have you learned around Fintech? And even if it's, just a little bit here, I'm sure there are people here who would love to pitch you on some Fintech opportunities, but tell us just a little bit about what you've learned about Fintech so far.
No, I appreciate being brought into the Fintech crew. I'm not by training in technology, right? But I am a people person, right? And my job is to try to make sure that the products that we're building, we're thinking about real people, right? Again, that's not a revolutionary idea, but what you'll find in a lot of organizations is that you get so focused on what is the tech that you can sometimes miss, who are the people that we're building this technology for? Are we actually solving a problem for them that's a real one? there's a lot of useless tech out there these days that is beautiful and I imagine functions well, but like nobody actually is asking for it to be built. My job is to have the relationship with our customer, knowing that if we are really in relationship, I was a quote once, you can't lead people if you don't love people, right? Are we in love with our customer? Do we know them? What are we doing to make sure that not only the product that we have out, but the one that we're building is thinking about all of the things that they want to see us as a company have happen. And so I'm biased, but I think that you have to have those people inside of a technology company because, again, you could find yourself pursuing a really cool tech development project that nobody actually is truly asking for. And then what is the point? And I think there's a quantitative part of that, but then there's also qualitative, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the businesses that we're building, hopefully, have the impact of being helpful to folks. We need to make money. We need to make sure that the business cares for itself, plus some, ideally. But the businesses that we really remember, they solved a problem for real people.
Yeah.
So I try to bring that perspective to our work each and every day. And look, trends change. The things that our membership community needed when we first started, and now, the world is a lot different, right? We've got a lot of things that are different about this time. What do people need now? And then what are they going to need next year and the year after, right? So I would encourage anybody that's in that part of the startup process to really take a step back from time to time and ask these kind of very fundamental questions. Are we headed in a direction that is going to be helpful to folks?
And continuing with the Greenwood, so obviously news was out that there was a dispute that has since been, there's been a lot of repair that's been done. You all did what I thought was a very brilliant town hall and stood up and directly took on questions from community members, from account holders at Greenwood, and so I thought that was extremely well done. So looking at it now, what does it look like for you on the ground today? Because I know there were some initiatives. You all were going to have some dinners with some of the different communities, speaking to people and making sure you're alleviating any concerns. So what does that look like today in terms of, how things have come back together and moving forward?
I'm fortunate to say my job hasn't changed very much, right? It's always been directly tied to our membership community. One thing that we have always been proud of at TGS is that when folks come into the community, they stay. I mean, even through COVID, we were churning at less than 2% of our members. It's been very, very, very sticky, right? And that's because of the true community that exists there. I'm back at work, and I've never left, right? Doing that, trying to make sure that one, I'm available. That's my job at TGS. I manage the community and try to connect the dots between people that ordinarily wouldn't have met. So nothing new for me, right? I mean, doing town halls and having open discussion. When you're 24 and you're starting a company and you have no experience in all of the verticals that we do at TGS, the only way that you get there is talking to folks and having a real relationship. So I'm proud of where we are and super excited about where we're going because the community is informing that discussion and we're meeting as a team making sure that we're going to meet their needs in the long run.
If there's one thing you want to leave folks here with in the sense of the importance that community has been to you, again, with, making sure that folks did not churn off and that they saw that you all were able to come up with a solution that worked for Greenwood in the gathering spot, that, you could be someone. I was watching one of your talks on social media not long ago and just talking about having the audacity to do something, which I'm sure not just fintech, but any startup entrepreneur can realize. But if there's one thing you want people to leave with that's sort of been, your North Star guiding light about where you've been and what community has been to you, what would that be?
Our business has only been possible because of the good people at TGS that made it so, right? And I've never lost sight of that, but continuing to make sure that we're developing those relationships. there's only a couple moments in a business where you really get to stress test your relationship. COVID was one where the gathering spot, we can't gather, right? But there are other seasons that you go through as a business. The community is the thing that no matter how much money we were raising or what was happening, community was the thing that made TGS possible. And so that's always been my reflection. That's the thing I try to remind myself of every single day.
We have hit time. Tell everybody where to find you. You definitely need to follow Ryan Wilson on Instagram, because if you think that what he said here is pretty profound, he is sort of like the motivational speaker of all motivational speakers. People think he has a political career in front of him. I just want to make sure that, the fintech community is around, because they're going to need to process some payments, to however that whole thing works, that ecosystem. None of my business, but Ryan Wilson, where can they keep up with you?
I'm on all platforms, Ryan Wilson at SpotOnRW. Again, I appreciate being here, and I look forward to continuing to see this community grow. It's a special thing that Atlanta specifically has this sort of gathering happening, and so I'm excited to be a part of it.
Ryan Wilson, give him a round of applause.